Hi, everybody. I hope you are doing well today. I'm so happy to show you some of these Bumblebee watercolor sketches and how to create them. I know right now with the weather, it's becoming nicer outside and the bumblebees are out full force. So if you want to paint from life, this is a really great time to do that. And this is just a really easy technique, very like watery and loose, so you don't feel like you're getting too tight with your painting style. And I also have right here one of the bumblebees that I found last year in my garden that just ended up, landing exactly like this. So the colors are a little bit darker than it would normally be when it's still alive. But I love collecting things like this to study and also just because I love taxidermy and natural history museums. So I'm going to keep this out just as a reference for the wings and parts of the body. I'm already dropping it. Oh no. So I have my Cotman Sketcher box right here. This is great when you're painting outside using plein air painting, just a simple watercolor palette. I have a series of just simple round brushes. So I've got the number 6, 4, and 2. If you want, you can use an even smaller brush, like a 0, if you want a little bit more control over these really thin lines that we're going to create today. And with these bumblebees, they usually look better when they're a little bit smaller, but I just have them pretty large on screen so you can actually see what I'm doing here. So if you want, when you're designing your own things, if you're adding, flowers and lavender around your bumblebee to place it in a setting, sometimes it helps just to make them a little bit smaller. So I'm going off tangent here, but I have some paper towels and a cup of water. You can always have a second one out if you want to have one for your like clean water and one for like dirty water, which is always helpful. I tend to just clean this out more often and give myself a chance to have a break if I'm painting for long periods of time. So that's my way of like controlling my time. So in here, we're going to use just a few colors to create our bumblebees today, but I am possibly going to be adding some Payne's Gray and Indigo to my designs. Those are two of my favorite colors that I like to use in my watercolor. But if you don't have these, I'll show you how to create something similar on your palette here. Okay. Okay, so as we're getting started, I just want to quickly go over some of the colors that we will be using today. And one of them is our cadmium yellow, which is this one right here in our pocket box, if you have this palette. And you can use something similar to it if you have gamboge, if you have anything more in that orange or darker yellow category, that's going to work really well for your bumblebees. And you can see right here with this color that is straight out of our pan, how it looks like when it's pretty much like a thicker consistency where it has the most saturation to it. And then as we add water where it becomes less saturated, it turns into more of this pastel yellow. So we're going to use this as kind of our highlight area and a way to create transitions. And then when we want that pop of yellow for our bumblebee, we'll add in our solid color straight out of the tube or out of the palette. Another color we'll use is Payne's Gray, or you can use like a neutral tint or anything that has a slightly blue tint to it. So if you don't have this color in your palette, I'll show you how to create something similar using your primary colors mixed together. So we'll most likely use some of our cadmium yellow right here, a little bit of our alizarin crimson, and a little bit of our ultramarine blue. And if we need to neutralize that a tiny bit more, we can add some burnt umber to it, just because that blue tends to overpower some of our other colors. So for this, I want there to be a little bit of blue to it though, because with black, you'll see, especially with this piece right here, I know that if I redo this, which I'm going to do on screen today, if I added a tiny bit more of a blue consistency to the black, it's going to make this yellow and other colors around it pop out a little bit more. So we're going to expand a little bit on what you're seeing right here with these swatches by adding a little bit more blues or a little bit more reds in areas, just so this black doesn't feel so flat. And that's normal. I mean, that's what black paint does. It's supposed to be the darkest color, right? It has no other color usually added to it straight out of a tube like this. So you need to assist it with a little bit more color to make it come to life on your design. Hopefully that makes sense. So other things that you can use as options, which I think are great, are cadmium red, which is just this color right here. If you want to mix that with your yellow, you can create some really nice, vibrant reds and oranges in your Bumblebee if you want to have a more saturated looking color. Alizarin crimson is great if you also want to create another similar color to this, or if you are wanting to create some flowers and other things surrounding the Bumblebee, you can add some of that to it, which we'll do today. And then last, if sometimes you have like this process orange here that's in some of your palettes, you can always use that instead of mixing your colors. So oops, hello, kitty. I prefer to, oh gosh, he's about to destroy everything. He almost pushed over my coffee. So we'll do this with the cat right here. If you want, you can have like this process orange or other color added to it if you want to just practice with what you have on your palette. So typically I mix my colors together, but I know that sometimes you want to use, what you have and what you paid for. So that's always something good to have on hand. I didn't swatch ultramarine blue, but we will be using that today as well. So I'll just do that really quick so you can see on screen. This color right here. Just a nice blue that we'll use to create our lavender and other little flowers around our piece. So we'll mix that with our black to create some nice colors inside that. Or if you want to have more vibrant blues and purples when we add our lavender, you can use your phthalo blue or intense blue. And you can see this one here is quite a bit more synthetic, but it mixes beautifully with other colors. You see right here, it instantly changes the color of my water. Okay. So to start, what we're going to do is just get our colors put together with our palette. And I know for some of you, you're becoming more serious about painting, and sometimes you want to document the colors that you're using, or if you just want to see how they dilute, you can go on my site and I have these available as like blank swatches if you want to create your own little collection or swatch cards as practice. So this is kind of probably a little bit more intense of documenting, but I think it's really great for practicing and also just remembering what you have in your collection. If you're like me, you might have several different types of watercolors. So this will be helpful just to understand, what's in your studio. So this is great. You can always make your own too by creating a little color swatch chart. Okay. Hey, buddy. So this will be extra exciting with a cat who wants to be part of this painting today. So the first thing that we'll do is we're just going to grab some of our cadmium yellow. And I'm just going to scoop some of this out onto my palette so I have it available when I'm painting. And then you can take whatever is left on your brush if you want to just scoop a little bit into another well right here. And then you can add some of the color and water from that to create a less pigmented version. So normally, as you practice, this becomes easier for you to see how thin your paint is going to be. But while you're practicing, sometimes it's easier just to pre-mix these colors. So then you're not battling with it when you're trying to paint. And then we'll leave whatever's left in here to be our final colors. So you should have these three right here. So first one is out of the pan, second one is right here, and this third really diluted one is in this third well. So I'm also going to scoop out a little bit of this alizarin crimson right here. And for this, we don't need a whole lot of this right now because we're going to mix our purples and violets later on for our lavender. But for right now, if I want to create some of these orange colors, I can mix some of my yellow and crimson together. So I'll take a little bit of my yellow and mix it with that. And you can see it creates this really beautiful, rusty orange color. And if I want a slightly different version of that, I can scoop out a little bit of my cadmium red, which is already more of an orange and warmer color than our alizarin crimson. That one's more cool toned. You can create a more vibrant looking orange with that and a little bit of your yellow. And that's where you get basically the same color that you're seeing right here. And the reason why it's more vibrant is because these two are closer on the color wheel together. They're both were in that, gosh, I can't talk, in that warm range, right? You can see how they're not really competing with each other as much as this yellow is competing with this more cool toned red. So that's why sometimes you get similar colors, but they also have a very different look to them, especially as they're drying on your paper. Another thing we'll mix is this color right here. So this is going to be something similar to our Payne's Gray, fresh out of a tube. If you have that, you can just use some of that that's diluted with a little bit of water. But if you don't have that, it's really easy to mix something similar. You'll just mix up your primary colors by starting with equal parts of each. So I'm going to take some of this yellow that we were just using. Clean your brush. Use a little bit of your crimson. Since we're mostly going to use this color more than this red. If you know you're using more of the red, I would select that one just so that color matches your other things. It's going to get that rusty color. And then I'm going to take some of my ultramarine blue. You can see this instantly starts neutralizing that color. It's going to be more of a brown tone to it. So sometimes it helps by adding a little bit more blue. Okay. And this should get you this nice kind of cool blue color. So if I do a swatch of this really quick, it's a little bit more gray. So this is a nice neutral tint. If I want to get closer to this, I will just add a little bit more of my blue. And that's pretty close to what we had right here. So if I want to make this a little less blue, I can take a tiny bit of my burnt umber. And that's going to neutralize that a little bit more. So anything within this range right here is going to work for you. I'm going to take a little bit more blue though. I know I want more blue in this piece because, like I said, this black just tends to dull out everything else. But you really need those dark colors for your bumblebee. So you don't want it to be completely blue in other areas. A little bit of burnt umber. There we go. That is the color I'm looking for. So very similar to this one here. You can always adjust it based on the blues that you have. I'll be somewhere within this light blue range to this deep Payne's Gray color. Okay, now if you have indigo or something similar, you're going to get something a little bit more vibrant than what we have right here. So if you want more of that, just add more blue. And you can see that's pretty much that color. Okay. So we have that available. Now, if we want to, what I suggest is making sure if you have it in your collection to get like a lamp black or an ivory black. But since we don't have that in this palette, basically what you would do is mix a stronger version of this and add a little bit more burnt umber to it. So I'm just going to do that on screen really quick. So we're using our cadmium yellow. Alizarin crimson. So I'm running low on now on some spots. I'll have to get more of that. And ultramarine blue. Now, when I swatch this, it's going to make a slightly darker color. And this is really close. This is like an ivory black color right here. So you could get away with using that for your darkest darks. This one is straight out of a tube. So it's always going to be a little bit different than when you mix fresh with new colors. So you could definitely use this as your darkest colors here. And just to see it diluted down, we get a little bit more of this lighter blue. So it's a great way to create our Payne's gray color and our solid black. Now, if you do have some, again, some ivory black or lamp black, that will be helpful if you want these really deep dark colors. So just to show on screen what that would look like, I have just a little bit of this right here. I'll take a tiny little swatch of that. And I can just take a little scoop of that and dilute that with a little bit of water. And that will give you that really solid black color if you need it. Good. So we have all the colors that we're going to be mixing right now. Later on, I'll show you how to create your purples and violets if we're doing some lavender and pink colors. But for right now, we're just going to focus on the bees. So I'm going to quickly just grab some fresh water since this is looking kind of gunky, and we'll start sketching out our shapes for our bumblebees. Okay, so when we look at the shape of the bumblebee, it's pretty simple for the most part. We have this, oh my gosh. We have, okay. We have this oval shape here with a series of smaller stripes and things within it. We're not going to go really detailed with a lot of our design today. We're mostly just going to focus on the colors and the way that they blend together. So if you want to keep it really simple, you can create this, I don't know, almost like a potato shape out of it. And that will give you your general shape of your bumblebee. And then I'll show you how to create some different poses where you can see part of the head, part of the body as it's flying, and it flat on a surface so that you're like looking directly down on. So there are many different ones that you can create as poses for them, especially if you're working from life, or if you have your own photographs of bumblebees on hand. So to create the shape, I'm just going to use my pencil and come up, oh man, buddy, come up with some just general oval shapes right here. And then usually I'll just have a slightly separate shape for the head so I know where that's at. So usually that's a little bit smaller than the others. If you can see that okay. Let me just pare this down a little bit. You can see that. We're not going to worry about the legs. Okay. And the wings, we're going to just do that really lightly. Okay. 1 second. I'm so sorry. I have to fix this situation with the cat. Okay, so I got the cat to sleep so I can actually get back to recording this session. So I went ahead and sketched out again this oval shape that we have. And then you can always separate a section of it to show the head of the bumblebee. And the other option, you can do more of just like an elongated oval. Sometimes people will emphasize more of that like angled shape of the bee. So sometimes it can be more of like a shape of like a jelly bean if you wanted to do that. And we're not focusing on the legs or the wings yet. I'm going to show you how to sketch those in just a few minutes. I tend to freehand them just because I like to have more of a lightness to them. It's really easy to make them look heavy. So you can see like right along here how I'm leaving spaces in between the legs of the bumblebees. Some of them are more transparent with their colors, some are darker. And that just has more of like, I wouldn't say effortless because it's not, but it gives it just a lighter appearance to the legs, and they just feel like they're part of the body, but not distracting from the body. So we'll do a few more little quick sketches, and then we're going to practice with some of our colors, and then we'll start putting them in. So these next few steps will go pretty quickly. So we can do another little jelly bean type shape down here if you'd like. So I'm going to make a little bit bigger. And this one's showing like the side of the body. So if I wanted to emphasize the shape of the head a little bit more, I can create slightly rounded curve with more of like a sharp V shape towards the bottom. Make this one a little bit fatter. Why not? Let me just zoom this in so you can see a little bit better on screen. This one's a little bit trickier to show. I lost a little bit of the features of the face, but if you just want to show a different version of a bumblebee where its wings are back, this is also really easy. You're mostly just, again, changing the direction of more of this jelly bean style shape. I'm going to try and bring the head back a little bit more into it. And there's a lot of different ways that you can make it look either more realistic or more, I wouldn't say cutesy is the right word either, but more fun, less aggressive or scary looking as an insect, especially since they're pretty big bees. But I know sometimes people like to focus more on realism, and then others more on like more the playful side of watercolor. So you can always decide how you want your bees to look and what kind of personality they have, I guess. I know some of the ones I drew in the past, I was like, this thing looks like it's going to hurt somebody. And, maybe you don't want that for your piece. That wasn't intentional on that one. It's just how that turned out. I mean, it still looked nice. It was just like a bee you wouldn't really want to be around. One that you more run from screaming. But bugs are bugs. So this one has a little bit more of a point to its back. I know it's hard to see right here because we have part of the leg that's coming down. And then I tried to put a little bit more emphasis on the shape because their heads are more like the shape of like a guitar pick like this. So whenever you're turning it, you always want to have a slight angle to it. And on this one, I'm just going to sketch in some of the stripes on it because I know that this is one of the trickier ones for you. It comes up like that. And get rid of some of these extra lines so you can actually see what you're drawing. And then where the body shape down here, it gets a little bit thinner. Okay, so we've got the shape of the face. And they usually have a pretty big eye to them too. So again, this is where you can always add more details if you'd like. And I know last year and I had another bumblebee incident, and this bumblebee just came crawling right up to me when I was trying to pull weeds in the garden, and it freaked me out. But it must have like knocked itself out, or it didn't have enough food in its system. So I gave it a bunch of lavender and like took care of it, made a little home for a little while. But I didn't realize as I'm, you know, watching over this bee, how long their little proboscis is. So if you wanted to, like their little feeding tube that comes out of their mouths, it's pretty big. So if you wanted to add a little detail of that, you could. I know they tend to like curl up. So you can have part of that if it's going into, let's say you're doing this design where it's sitting on a flower or something, that little detail of it feeding could be really fun if you wanted to do that. So I'm gonna leave that out just a little bit. I'm just making it a little less intense. But it was pretty cool just to sit it and watch it for a while. And I don't know. I should have been like a biology major sometimes, I think, in my head, but I'm not smart enough for that. So I will just study nature as an artist. But it's great to document them and to again like learn from life, because photos can teach you a lot, but it isn't until you're seeing something up close and in person where you can really study like the shape of it. So that's where that story comes from, basically. Let's see. And on this one, I am going to draw in a little bit of the legs for it just to help you out, because some of this does overlap here. So we'll do this one a little bit slower. So for the legs, it's kind of like how I imagine, I don't know if you're eating crab legs, where it has these different segments to them. Some are a little bit wider in areas than others, and then it just kind of tapers out. So you have some of these wider sections here of like the bottom half of their leg, and then this upper half here. You're gonna do the same thing right along here where it's kind of coming out. And their leg kind of tapers off. There's another one right here. Where it's thinning out. So I'll just show that to you a little bit closer. Now, right now it looks more like a beetle, but when we add in the wings and like the antenna that are going to be coming out right along here, it'll look more like a bee. And that's looking really good. So the last little one that we'll sketch out is this shape right here. And this one is a little bit different. So the head of it, we're seeing from a different angle where it's like tucked under, kind of like this original one right here. So you can see if you look closely at this top section where this head is tucked under the bottom part of the body, you're seeing this really harsh like V shape coming from there. So you're not seeing the full face of the bee. So to do that, we're going to create kind of a wider version of this upside down. So like a rounded triangle. And then with the bottom half of the bee, you're seeing it kind of segmented. So part of it kind of comes down a little bit more. And I'm going to do two versions of this. So one from my insect right here, and then one from this shape here, just to give you some variety. And this one you can really see where it's segmented with the upper and lower half of the body. So if I wanted to emphasize that, I can basically mimic what's happening with the top half and just pull that down a little bit more. So this is more like a realistic looking bee. Obviously, we're working from life, so that's going to change a lot of the way that we are seeing this object. So again, it's often much better for you when you're learning to work from life, because then you can really study it up close. You can see those natural shapes, especially since photography tends to flatten things in the way that you perceive them. So if you can work between both, if possible. I know I still use a lot of photographs as reference. It's almost impossible not to, especially if you can't go to a place or see something. So, but if you do get the opportunity, please take that, because it will teach you so much. And I know that many of you are really working hard at learning more and, understanding more of watercolor and drawing and painting. So I think everybody's doing great. So here I'm just going to show a little bit more. Again, I'm working from this part right here, so I can really see how things are segmented. So we're seeing the upper half of the body. We can't see the head because it's tucked under, where it's starting to connect to this bottom segment right here, which is always a little bit wider. And then on this one, it kind of tucks in a little bit more to create these different stripes. Now in this other one, we're going to simplify that a little bit more. So you're seeing more of like a fat bee where it's sitting on the ground, relaxing. So we're going to do the same type of top for this. Same type of like rounded triangle. Actually, I'm going to move this over a tiny bit because I know I have to add these wings on this other one that are going to go out pretty far. So yeah, if I'm looking at this example, the wings would be probably right about to there. Like that. So I'll just keep those in there so I don't accidentally go into my other design. I'm going to do these a little bit bigger too, just to show you how to create that transition. So I'm going to move it just right over here. Again, same rounded triangle. And then this one, we're going to keep it a little bit more simple, where we're just creating more of this elongated B shape. And if it helps you understand on this one, you can just imagine that the wings go out. It's right about here. So it kind of looks like a spaceship. Okay. And I'm thinking the only other one where it's really kind of tricky with the legs is probably this one where we're seeing this side profile here. So just to get you to practice some of these shapes, we'll go ahead and put some of that in. So on this one, we have a leg that's kind of dangling down to create more of this like V shape here, or like a zigzag shape. So even if you just do like a quick little line like that, that's going to help you understand where that overall leg is at. Just make that less pronounced. Now the bottom half or back half of this top leg here is always going to be a little bit bigger, just like what you're seeing on here. Again, think of like, I don't know, crab legs, where you have those different joints that are connecting together. I'm sure there's a better, I mean, they're bee legs, but most people can't see bee legs that close. But if you think about it like food, I guess maybe that'll help. I know it helps me. So it kind of looks like more of like a flea right now. If I wanted to, there's always usually like a little mandible towards the top part as well. So you usually get a little bit of these smaller legs. Now, same as before, if you want to emphasize this little proboscis that comes out from the mouth, you can always have some of that out. Most likely if it's flying, it's not really out, but you can just have a little reference to that if you want. I'm just gonna make this one a little bit taller right here. Give it a little bit more of like a humpback. There we go, that looks better. Okay. So I'm gonna leave this out so you can see it as a reference while we're painting. But right before we get started with doing these final paintings here, I wanted to show you how to create more of this gradient effect. So in my original thing that I sent out, I had these little transition little swatches right here. So this is going to help you understand how this bleeding effect is going to make the texture of the bee, where you have all those little fuzzies and other things that make it have that detail that you want for it. So, you know, this is really a detailed drawing for a watercolor. If you're not wanting to do something like that and you want more of just these simple fuzzy bees, the best way to do that is by adding that wet and wet technique. So we're dropping different colors in at a time, and that's going to help us create that texture of the bee. So with these were done in two different ways. This one was done completely wet and wet technique, where I went ahead and added mostly yellow in places where we have that really light yellow color right here. And then as it was drying, I added some darker yellow, some of that Payne's gray or blue black, and then built it up that way. So when you do it that way, you have a lot less control over it. I also did it on this one too, where you can see how it's very watery, right? It's bleeding. You don't really have detail, which looks fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want something more specific, if you're looking more for realism, you're probably going to want to go for the other technique, where you're working a little bit slower. You're spacing things out, where you're only adding the yellow in certain places and then leaving other places blank. So I'll show you both, and you can decide, you know, what you're comfortable with when you're doing your painting. And there's nothing wrong with bouncing back and forth between both of them. I tend to do that with my own work, where I can do really highly detailed work some days, and then other days, I just want it to look like it's dissolving into the paper. And both of them can look really beautiful as watercolors. So no pressure whatsoever. So if you have some extra space somewhere on your paper, or like an extra scrap piece of paper, you can practice on that. I'm just going to do it right along here in this section just to show you how that works. So we're going to do two different renditions of it, just to show you how adding a little bit more blue in places, or a little bit more of that blue gray, is going to affect the way that your painting turns out. And then we also have to think about the timing of water and how it's like soaking into the paper and how things are drying. So sometimes you have to work a little bit more quickly. Sometimes you have to wait a few seconds before you add another color. So we're just going to practice with that just 2 times, and then we'll jump into our actual paintings. So we already pre-mixed our colors, so this part's going to go pretty quickly. We have our diluted yellow here, where it's almost completely transparent. So we're going to start with that. And you can work in 2 different directions. You can have it going this way, where you're creating some zigzag shapes, or you can do it vertically. So just to show you the first swatch, I'm just going to do it vertically. But sometimes, you know, the direction of your brush is going to affect the way that your painting turns out. So it's a really light yellow. We also have our mid yellow here where it's a little bit more opaque, a little bit more pigmented. So I'm going to bring that slightly into our other color. After that, I'm going to go right into my cadmium yellow, which is already drying down quite a bit. So we want this to be a little bit thicker, a little less water added to it because we want the full strength of that color. So you're going to get more of this yellow orange. And then we're going to just drag that over a little bit so we can create that transition color. That's where you're going to create some of these little transitions of yellows. I'll show you this one because this one's a better example. So like our transitions of yellow from here to here was just done in a different direction. So you can see if I turned it upside down, that same direction of color is easily used in the piece. So after waiting a few seconds, I can go in with that Payne's gray or blue-black color. And depending on how dark you want this to be, sometimes you can have it be a little bit more transparent. But as soon as you bring it over to that other yellow, it's going to start bleeding into each other. So just to show it a little bit closer, this is where you can get some of that greenish gray color that's pooling into our blue, which is exactly what we want. And the reason why we wait a few seconds is that we don't want this blue totally coming into all of our other yellows. That would just overpower the piece and muddy it up a little bit. After that, you can go in with your darker blue-black. So you can either have that, I have some of that right here too. You can bring some of that over. And that's also going to bleed right into that other color. So depending on how much water is on your paper, how much of that original color is drying down is going to change where that moves around on you. So if you feel like it's too much or it's too watery, you can always scoop up some of that color and just wipe it off on your paper towel. And that will give you a little bit more of a smoother transition. So we're going to do another one of these. And this is where you can practice with adding in some yellows and oranges and reds together if you want to create a more saturated looking bee where it has this little pop of color. It's almost like a peachy color right here that looks really beautiful. So you can play around with adding other colors into that wet color just to see what happens. Because once you have these two starting to bleed together, sometimes it can dull out the rest of your things. So this is where just that little pop of another color can really bring everything to life. So we're starting again with our really diluted yellow. If you need to, you can go in with that mid-range yellow. Sometimes I'll just go right into my cadmium and then give myself a little bit of a space between them. If I want to, I can add some of these rusty looking colors here. So this is where I added cadmium yellow and a little bit of my cadmium red, or cadmium yellow and a little bit of alizarin. So just to show you the cadmium red, I like to just put that right where it's transitioning that darkest area of that color over, just to brighten it up a little bit. Or if you have pre-mixed orange, that works well too. You can already see here how this is a little bit more vibrant already than what we have up here. So that's where that little pop really helps. Go back in with some of our Payne's gray. You can paint it right up to this other color if you don't want too much of it dipping in to your original. So you can have them kind of just pull into each other right there. You can already see that some of that orange is starting to pull into our Payne's gray, which is great. And then we can always go back in with our darkest black afterwards. So again, you can have them go right up next to each other if you don't want too much of that color seeping in. So this is kind of like a neutral, it's almost a brown color right now. The color is separated a little bit on my palette. You can see it almost looks red right here. So I need to mix those a little bit better. But if you had a solid black, like right out of a tube, you can always mix it with some ultramarine, or you can leave it as the solid black as your final dark color. So don't be afraid to mix and match your colors. Don't be afraid to add new colors. You can see here how this made quite a big difference with the transition that you're seeing from top to bottom. Sometimes people will add sepia or burnt umber to it as well. This has kind of a brown color to it already, so that to me looks fine. But yeah, I think it'll look good. Okay. So now we will start our first one. So this is the one where we're going to do the wet and wet technique. So we're mostly adding in this really light yellow color. So I'm going to mostly erase my lines right here of this jelly bean shape. And these always look really nice, especially when you're using really transparent yellows. If it looks like you just painted directly on your watercolor without sketching it out. So I like to almost completely erase my lines. So you're not really going to see the lines for a second. So from there, I'm going to go in with my lightest yellow color that's been watered down. And I can leave areas that are open a little bit if I want to have some of my white shining through, which I always think looks really good for any watercolor. It just connects the painting to the paper, creates some nice highlights, and just makes it feel less heavy. So you can just see a few little gaps and spaces right there. And I know there's a glare on here, so let me pull this closer. You can see I left some spaces open. Now you'll have to work a little bit faster on this part because again, we're doing that wet and wet technique. And as your paper soaks in that pigment, it's going to change the color of it a little bit by making it lighter. And it's also going to make it harder to drop in new colors. So I'm going to go in with either my mid yellow, which I think I should do for you right here. And we're only going to focus on where our darkest yellows are going to be. So I'm just going to put these in where the bottom half of that stripe is. If you can see that okay. If you want, you can add a little bit of your rusty colors. I'm going to go in just with a little bit of my cadmium red in just a few spots. Just to give it a little bit of warmth. I didn't do that on this one, but I wish I did because I think it would look so nice. Okay. And then after that, we're going to go in with our Payne's gray. So if you don't want too much bleeding and blooming in here, Wait just a few more seconds and then you can add in your Payne's gray. And I like to just kind of scrub it along parts of the design. So then that's going to help create that fuzzy texture that we're looking for. Definitely along the top of the head right here. If I need to, I can go back in with a little bit more of that darker black in just a few spots. So I'm going to just drop that color down to in just a few little areas of my painting because I definitely don't want that to overpower the rest of it. So usually along those outer edges, especially on the black stripes, you can make that a little bit darker. And along the top of the head. And even then I like to just fluff that out a little bit more so it doesn't feel like a perfect shape. That's looking pretty good. So after that, we're just going to put in some legs right here. So right along here, you can see how it's starting to create that shape. So I'm just going to use my brush just slightly angled and pull some of that color down. I have a little leg back here. If you want, you can wipe off some of that color if you want to make it look a little bit less heavy. And you can see I'm just leaving some spaces between it. So it looks like it's just almost like a connect the dots kind of situation. This is more of like a warm black right here compared to this cool black. So there's a lot of red in this one. I'm gonna have to change that. And I think I added a little bit too many legs on this one right here. Yeah, this one's a little bit long. I'll scoop that up. There we go. So again, you can always add in a slightly darker bit of color, especially where the legs are connecting to the rest of the body, or anywhere where you just need that really, really dark black. And then with my smallest brush, while this is still damp, I'll take some of that darker black and I will just use the very, very end of the brush to create some nice little hairs coming off of the bumblebee, especially on the legs where they tend to show a lot of that. So you don't have to do this part. This is just a fun way to add a little bit more texture to it. And you don't need a lot of it, just wherever you want to show a little bit is good. And then we also need to add the rest of the antenna right here. So you can use that same brush and just use the very end of it to create those lines. Now, right now it looks a little weird because we don't have any wings added to it. So to add the wings while this is still damp, I'm going to switch to my number 4 round or something similar. I'm going to dip my brush in my water. And then I still have some of this color that's damp right here. So I can just use that to pull out a little bit of the color that I want. So we can create more of this brown look to it without having to mix any colors. Same thing on this side. This side might be a little bit drier. So if I need to, I can just take the tiniest bit of color on my brush and create those wings. Now, if you want to add more texture to them, you can always go back in with some of your solid black and your teeny tiny brush. And you can just add a few little pops of that color. I like to do it while it's damp, just because it will bleed that out a little bit more. That's kind of heavy. Let me pull that up a tiny bit. But you really don't need a lot to show that those are wings. And even this right here is probably too heavy, so I'm going to scoop some of that up. There we go. That will create that transparent appearance to them that you would normally see with the bees. Okay. Now, if I want to fluff this out a little bit more, I can. Always, I feel like right here it's a little bit too light. And then if you ever need to add a little bit more black, you can while it's still wet. If it's already dry, just leave it alone. It'll look good the way it is. Otherwise, you're going to just have it sitting on top of the surface and it just doesn't look like it'll ever really connect that well. So if you want more of that effortless look to your bee, that's the best way to do it. So in this one, I like it because I did have a lot of red in that black mixture that I had. So you can see right here, it almost has like a calico appearance to it where you have some greens and blues and reds, and it just gives it a little bit more vibrancy. Okay. So that's a good starter for it. The wet and wet technique, again, is a little bit harder to work with because you have less control. So on this next one here, we're going to do it where we add just the stripes of the yellow first, where we're leaving gaps between those yellow to create our black. And then we'll go back in with that other color. So that way your colors aren't mixing as much. And you have more, I guess, consistency with color. But actually, I'm really surprised by parts of this where I'm like, that looks really good. I like it. I'm not like in love with the shape of the bee. I probably could do a little bit more with like the top of the head so it looks less like a flying potato or jelly bean, but I'm just going to leave it as it is right now because, again, it's a learning experience. So for this one, I have a more developed shape of the head too, which I think is going to make a big difference between the rest of the body. So really, it comes down to just these really minor differences with how you want your overall bee to look. Okay, so as we move on to our next one, this is where sometimes it helps if you want to just draw in just lightly some of these stripe shapes so you know where things are going. I'm just going to freehand it on screen so you can see roughly how that'll look. But beforehand, I'm going to erase most of my lines. So a kneaded eraser is really good for this if you have one. I'm just keeping it simple today. And I'm going to go in with this number 4 round. That way I have a little bit more control over where these lines are going to be. And we're going to start with our lightest yellow wash. And I'm just going to start putting this in. Okay. So I know that's a glare. You can see that okay. Okay. You can go in with your mid yellow or your cadmium yellow, just straight from the pan. Just going to drop that in a few spots. Again, I'm going to focus more towards the bottom half or the one, half of our stripes here so it doesn't take away some of that highlight color that I want for the top of my bee. And then if you want more drama, you can add in some of your rusty colors or yellows. I'm just going to dip into my cadmium red on here since I'm running a little bit low on those colors. And I'm just going to drop that into a few spots. Oh, that's a little bit too red. I can pull some of that up though. And pull a tiny bit of that up. That feels really harsh. There we go. A little intense with the reds. So that's more of an orange transition where we have our light, our medium yellow, and then our dark yellow orange. So after that, I'm just going to wait a few seconds and then I'm going to dip into my darker blue gray. There we go. Just had to do a quick swatch of it. I'm running low on this one over here, so glad I made a little bit extra. So now from here, you can see in my example where just like before, where we have those little bits of white showing through, I want that as well on this piece. So I'm not going to completely cover over my entire bee shape. That's just going to make it look really flat. So in this case, when you add in your blacks, you can just add it sparingly in spots. And you can choose how much of this color you want to put into your red and orange and yellows. Some of this other color has dried a little bit. So if I want to activate that, I can dip into a little bit of that original yellow to help create that transition. I don't want it too muddled, but I definitely want a little bit more color there. And then I'm going to go back in with that other color and I'm going to add in like the shape of the head. Again, we're just keeping this really loose. As you can see down here, I go pretty dark with our next colors. So if you need to, if you're worried about your yellows and oranges, you can add in a little bit more in a few spots. You can see that okay. And then I'm going to go in with my darkest color. And then this is where I'm going to focus mostly where those legs are going to go. So you can see I pull that color up a little bit into here. And then I have a little bit more in the top of the head. So again, I'm doing this kind of quickly, but if you wanted to have more control, you just wait a few more seconds for that to dry. If you feel like the second you put down a color and it just goes everywhere without control, just on your next one that you work on, just give yourself a few more seconds and it really makes a huge difference. Looking pretty good. I need to add in some legs in just a minute. I think I want a little bit more black right along here. It's looking kind of like an Easter egg right now. So I need to give it a little bit more structure to its shape. There we go. Okay. So from here, what I can do is pull down a little bit of a leg right here and right along here where it looks like it's flying and like its little bee legs are getting pushed back. And I don't want this to be so heavy in places. So I'm going to clean off my brush, wipe off a good bit of the water, and then I can pull a little bit of this original color down. And you can see it instantly makes more of a blue grayish color, which is closer to what I want. And then I'm still not completely connecting those dots in places, just so it feels like, again, they're less heavy. They have movement, that whole thing. Now at this point, this is where you can start adding in some texture if you want to have some little fluffy bits on your piece. This is where you go in with your lightest and smallest brush. Not lightest, smallest brush. If I want to add some little details, and start right along there. And some fuzzies around the face. Again, just using the very, very end of your brush. I especially like to add those around the legs. Just really brings them to life. Got another little part right here. Again, a little bit goes a long way with these. So the human brain will just see a little bit of texture and immediately connect the dots when you're looking at the shapes, especially like insects and other animals. You don't really need to have it highly detailed unless you want to. So the last thing we need to add is we need some wings. So down here, this is still a little bit damp, so I should be able to pull some of that color over with my number 4 round. So make sure that your brush is damp. And then you can just take a little bit of that texture from those edges and pull that over. You can see it's already creating like kind of a brownish gray color, which is perfect for the wings. Now up here, you might not have so much since this is mostly dry, so you can always scoop up a little bit of this color from your other wing and just create a few little lines to connect them. Same as before, if you want to add even more detail, you can take your smallest round brush and with a little bit of your darker color, either your Payne's gray or your black, and you can just add in a few little veins that are within the, it's not showing up, within the different wings. Again, a little bit goes a long way with that too. And that looks good. I like that bee. Again, these always look better when they're a little bit smaller too. So these are really big bees. Now, if you're doing a large painting and this is just one aspect of them, I think it would be fine. But we also don't have these placed in any sort of setting. So they just are sitting on top of the paper and not really telling a story. But it's great for practice when you're just trying to figure out what exactly these shapes are. Because they can, even something as simple as like this type of shape can become really difficult if you're trying to add a lot of textures and colors. So, take your time with it, practice as much as you need to, and I'm sure everything's coming out really beautifully right now. So as you're working, just make sure that you take breaks every now and then too. I'm going to go ahead and switch my water out really quick, and I will be right back. Okay, so on these next two, I think I'm going to start with this one over here, just because I'm left-handed and I'm gonna start dipping into things. So I am going to just erase this a little bit more. And on this one, this is more of that watery one that I did on the initial. So we'll bounce back and forth between doing this full watered down version and then one where it's a little bit more specific with the colors. That way you can get the best of both worlds and decide, again, what's best for you. Some wiggle in my camera. There is cat hair on everything now. Oh, I'm glad I'm not selling these. This would be rough. So on this one, I think I'm going to use a slightly larger brush just to cover in this area. So I'm going to switch to my number 6 round. And we're going to go in with that really diluted yellow. And we're going to cover up this whole jelly bean shape of the body. And this one has a really specific head shape to it here too. So this should come out really nice. I'm going to go back in with some of this darker yellow and spots. And you want to be sure not to add too much water in places. So think about the consistency of your paint. If you're pulling out some cadmium yellow from your tube or pan, maybe you want it to be just slightly thicker. That way it's not moving around so freely on the design. You can see right here how it's starting to like stick a little bit more in places, and that's going to give you more control over where you're painting. But obviously with this type of design where it's wet and wet, you only have so much control that you're adding anyway. If you want, you can add more of those orange and reds. I didn't do that on this one, but why not? Get the best of everything. I'm gonna keep this top a little bit lighter still. Might just bring a little bit more of this yellow right over here. But we definitely want there to be a transition of color between those lighter and darker areas. So it doesn't look like much now, but it will. So now we're going to go in with that Payne's gray color. If you need to, you can always add a little bit more ultramarine to it. If you want more of a bluish black, I'll try that on this one just to see. I don't want too much blue because then that yellow, when it touches it, it's going to make a green. So you definitely need to neutralize it a little bit. Let me do a swatch. Yeah, that's pretty much what I had before. I guess that's what I like. Let's see. That's a little bit more blue. Let's see how that turns out. If it fails, it fails. These are just practices anyway. So here's where I'm going to start putting in some of our little stripes for our bees. Definitely going to do it right around the shape of the head. Have this back area be a little bit wider. Or kind of tapers down. I think that'll look pretty. It always helps to look at nature. So if you're okay with bees, you can go out and just hang out with them one day in the yard. So here I'm going to leave a little bit open around the top of the head too. That's going to give us some control over our colors here. You can see where I started with a lighter gray around the top of the face and head, and how when I added in that darker color, it created a little bit more structure to the shape of the bee, and just gives it a little bit more going on with that. Okay, so from there, I'm going to go in with my darkest blue black. I'm only going to focus on a few areas. So definitely towards the bottom half of the bee where there would naturally be some shadows and other things. Do a little bit around the top of the head. You can see, just like I said before, I'm only going to add that black in a few spots, and it's going to bleed out a little bit anyway. Let me show this so you can see the sunscreen. Also right here, I can add a little bit where it's having more of that roundness. If you want to create the illusion of roundness, usually those edges are always a little bit darker. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and do the one part of the leg right here where we have that upper half. That way you can start pulling down those other colors. So I'm going to clean off this brush. And I'm going to switch to my small round here. And then here I have a lot of this wet paint. So if I wanted to, I can just use what's left over on the paint to create some of these really thin little wispy lines and hairs for the bee. And some right along this back here too. And just using the top of your brush. And then I'm going to just have part of its little proboscis sticking out on it because I think it's cool. So again, I have some little baby hairs and other things around it. If I wanted to, I can bring those legs down a little bit more and they start changing direction. So as I'm running out of paint on my brush, it's going to get lighter, or you're just barely seeing it. And then there's another little mandible right here, or another little leg. I'm forgetting the terms for bees. So I'm probably saying all of this wrong from a scientific point of view, but I don't care. Let's see. I'm going to add some little antenna right there. Again, the proboscis if you want it. Even though when it's flying, it's probably not sticking out. I just think it looks cool. And this one dried really well, but sometimes you need to go back in with a little bit of yellow. That's where I got this big kind of splotchy looking area right here. So don't be afraid to add more of your initial color if you'd like. I really like how this looks, but I'm going to show you anyway, just in case you need to make changes. So you can always dip in with a little bit of your yellow if you need to, just to bring some of that color back. Or you can wait for it to completely dry and you can do what's known as a glaze, where you are doing a really light, transparent wash that just barely changes the color, but it makes it maybe the color that you need for your design. Okay, now we just need to add some wings. I'm going to go back in with this number 4 round. And the top half of this is pretty dry, but there's a little bit of black right here that I can use. So that's going to reactivate that color just a tiny bit, enough for me to pull enough for the wings. Like that. And again, if you want to add in little veins and things, you can go in with your smallest brush and a little bit more of your darker color. And just use the very, very end of your brush to create some really wispy little lines. I like to do that when it's wet, just so it's not so heavy. You can see how it just bleeds right into those other colors. So it matches more of the colors that you have for your design. Good. So now I'm working kind of fast right now. So if you need to, just pause the video if you need to catch up and stuff. But for the most part, when we do these wet and wet techniques, you do have to work pretty quickly. This other one, we're going to change this up a little bit. So we're going to do more of this technique. So again, you decide what works best for you. I have some of the stripes already put in here. So I know there's one that starts right along this edge here. And obviously I'm going to leave this out for you just as a backup. But this one's fun because the wings are going in a different direction. So you can see them where they're rested, where their wings are pulled back. And we're going to take whatever color is sitting on the top of this shape of the bee and pull it back to create the really unique texture and color of the bee. So it's kind of like a brownish yellow and a brownish black, and that will be perfect for the design. So I tried to have a little bit more structure to the face here since it got lost on this one. So they are going to look a little bit different, but I do want to make this less dark with my outline. So for something like the eye, and you know that there's like black going around it, you can leave that a little bit darker because that's one thing where you definitely want to make sure that that stays. I know when I paint birds, like that's the one thing where it's like if the eye is wrong, it's just hard to make that work. But I'm also really picky, so I'm probably not a good example for that part. Okay, so we're going to start with our little stripes, just like what we did on this one. So we want to keep it nice and light. Leave spaces where there's white shining through, just like what we've been doing. On this one, I'm going to add a little bit of yellow towards the back of the bee, right along here. Like that. Now, sometimes I'll add, especially on one like this that we're about to do, I'll add more of like an ultramarine blue or like a light gray blue back there, depending on what kind of bumblebee it is. So while this is still damp, you can add in your cadmium yellow. I'm going to leave parts of it lighter just so it doesn't feel heavy when I'm adding in my other colors. And then of course you can add some orange if you want. And just in a few spots. If anything looks really heavy, you can always pull that color up with your brush and you can just wipe that off on your paper towel. Okay, next we'll do our Payne's gray color. We're going right in between those other ones. So again, make sure you leave a little bit of spaces where there's white showing through the paper. And I'm using more of these jagged lines where I'm like intentionally wiggling my brush back and forth to create that texture of the bee. It has that kind of fuzziness added to it. And then for the face, we're going to just do a few areas where we're going kind of lighter with that, just like what we did on this one, where we want to have these two steps of it where one side is a little bit lighter or darker than the other. So you can always pull up, if it's too dark, use your brush with a little bit of water on it and pull up that color. I can still see the shape of the eye right there. And then lastly, I'm going to go in with my dark blue black. And I'm going to go right around like the edge of the face right here. And this one is again a little bit tricky because we have the legs that are overlapping part of the body. So we want to make sure that we're not covering up too much of the shape of the bee down here where they connect. Otherwise, they're going to look like they're not part of the same body part. And you can switch back to your small brush here. I'm gonna add in just some little details. So this one also had, I wanted to have some little hairs coming off of the head. These are kind of heavy. I might be working too fast. Shape of the proboscis, little shapes of the legs over here. I'm losing part of my eye again, so I'm going to clean off my brush. Just pat it dry on my paper towel. And then I can pull that eye back a little bit. So we're just lifting that color up a tiny bit with our brush. I'll probably do a little bit more in a second. Okay, we've got part of the legs coming down right here. And also fluffing out over here. Always lift up if you need to, some of that color if it feels too heavy. And another thing you can do just to change things up a little bit is you can always drop a little bit of your yellow color into part of the legs. Like if it's something where it's really noticeable and it's really close up to the viewer, you can see where I dropped this yellow color in, how that's going to move that around a little bit. I just think it adds a little bit more to the design. I don't know why these hairs didn't want to work. Let's see if I can make that look a little bit better. This was the trickiest one, so I might just be getting a little bit tired. Or maybe it's just I'm working too fast. There's plenty of things. I'm going to still make it work though. It's like too early to tell right now with how it's going to turn out. So just try and work through the process. If it fails, but I think it'll still look good. Yeah, just a few little fuzzies over here in the back of the bee. That looks better. And some fuzzies on these legs. And then I'm going to quickly just put in the wings. So I'm going to use my number 4 round with a little bit of water on it and pull this color back. So I'm pulling it almost completely back from this spot right here on the wings or on the shape of the body. So if I need to, I can always take a little bit of paint on my brush if this other part is dried a little bit. And that'll help. Not bad. Not my favorite, but not bad. Let's see what happens when I add a little bit more of a darker color in a few spots. Oh, that looks a little bit better. Helps to separate where this wing is from the rest of the body. Add a little bit more fuzzy towards the back. Yeah, it's okay. I'm picky. Okay. So I think I want to just add a little bit more going on around it. I really love how this leg turned out right here though. You can see how that little pop of yellow changed this whole like shape where it's not as heavy as maybe over here. So that's a good way to add that like watery look to your design. Okay. So I'm gonna let these just dry for a second and I'm going to get some clean water again and I will be right back. Okay, so as these colors dry, I'm starting to like this one a lot more. Like I said, where it has those legs on it, it just feels like it's really coming together in this area right here. So I'm gonna let that one sit and just dry. And then as we work our way down the page, we're gonna work on this one, and then I'm gonna do the other one based on my bee right here. So for this one, I'm going to do it like what we did on our other example here where we're working with the stripes. So we're going to start by erasing the majority of our lines, which I just did. And then I'm going to start adding in these lighter areas of the bee. So you can see right here how there's this really nice bright yellow line. I want to make sure that I emphasize that with my shape. So this one is going to be quite dark. So I'm just going to go directly into my cadmium yellow for it. And then the majority of this section over here is black. So we have the very, very top of it that's going to be a dark black, and then directly under it to create like the top part of the bee. And then as we work our way down, we get to about right about here. And that's where we can start adding in some of our yellows. So I'm just going to make that a little bit lighter. I'm just going to dull out that bottom half of that color so it's a little less heavy. So I'm just using a little bit more water on my brush to pull that color down. And then there's a little bit of a gap there where I can put maybe just a tiny bit more of that really light yellow. So on this top half right here, though, I think it would be fun to go in with a really bright orange. So I'm just going to go in with some of that rusty color or red. And if I need to create a better transition, just add a little bit more of your cadmium yellow. And then from there, we're going to go into our Payne's gray. And we're going to start with the very top, or actually we're going to go right under this yellow right here. And I'm just going to go barely touching that yellow color with my brush. So I'm not pushing it around too much, but there is that nice fuzzy look to it. Right there. And I'm just going to fill in the rest of these little sections right here. So the top half of the bee should be kind of a nice blue black. I'm going to add a little bit more blue to it though. There we go. And a nice gradient effect. So it's pulling into that other color. If I need to assist it a little bit, I'll go in with a little bit of my yellow. To help add that transition. I lost some of that orange, so I'm going to put that back. Okay. And then down here, we're going to do that same really light color for the very bottom half of the bee. So it should be kind of like a nice bluish gray. And do a little bit darker around those edges of it. So then that makes it look like it's a little bit rounded. I'm just going to add a little bit of that color towards the very bottom. It just looks like it's kind of bleeding into that part. So I have a little bit of a white space right here too. And then from there, what we can do is add in a little bit of our legs. So we have, with that light gray, we're just going to add a little bit of a leg right along here and here. Okay. We're also going to add it right along this top half here. Again, it's very similar to these shapes, just to going in a different direction. So I like to leave things slightly open, just like before, where we're doing like more of a connect the dots. And then from there, this is where we can start adding in more of our darker colors. So we're going to go in with our dark, really dark blue black color. We're going to go right along the very top part of the head right here. think I waited too long where it doesn't want to bleed into the yellow, but I can fix that in a minute. I'm gonna add some little antenna. You can use your small brush for this part. I'm just being impatient, I guess. There we go. Sometimes I can get away with using my number 4 if I use the very, very end of it. And then from here, this is where I definitely want to go darker with part of the design. So we're going to just follow this along here to help create that rounded triangle shape again. If you want to blur some of that out, you can just add a little bit more water on your brush to help that transition over. I think I want a little bit more black for part of it. So this is going to be where your darkest color is going to be right along here where we're creating that segment between the upper and lower part of the body. I always add a little bit more color here or there. And while this is still damp right here, you can use a little bit of your color to pull down to create your wings. Again, I like to just leave them kind of broken right there. And it's going to overlap part of the legs too. So it's going to look like the legs are actually underneath the wings. It's kind of a hard thing to transition at times though. So sometimes I have them, like what I did here, I had them a little bit more blue in spots. And then to fix this transition right here between the black and the yellow, I'm just going to go directly into my yellow and load the brush up pretty well so then it's not very watery. And then you can just tap that right into your black right there to create that transition that you want. So there's going to be a little bit of a bleed, but it won't be overpowering. And then I just need to finish this bottom half. Oops, I've got yellow. Pull that up. I'm gonna use a little bit more of that darker black color and then just transition this down a little bit. Oh, I like what happened right there. May need a little bit more of that black, like the darkest color you've got. I'm just going to bring it right along this edge right here. There we go. That gives it that shape that I'm looking for. If I need to, I can just add a little bit more black to show that some of these are legs right here and where they're connecting with the rest of the body. This looks more like a carpenter bee, but you can always add a little bit more black if you wanted to in a few areas down here. And then just like before, if you want to use your small round brush, you can always go back in and create a few little veins and things within the wings. And that looks good. Yay. You can always create some little fuzzies if you want coming off of the bee. This one's more of like a realistic looking one, but I like how that looks. You can definitely have some fuzzies along here. That will create more of that bumblebee effect. There's like these little teeny tiny hairs towards the end too. Again, this is more into like heavy realism, but you can add a lot of character to it if you want. So you can get the best of all these different techniques. So this is one where, I was saying a lot of times if your bee is not very well, that's not true. This is just personal preference. But usually for me, like if something's bigger, usually I want to see like more detail added to it. But I'm also heavily into realism. So that's not necessarily true that you always have to show more detail. You can have it be more about like the texture, it could be more about the color. So there's lots of different ways that you can go about working with scale and also with just detail. Hopefully that makes sense. So the last one I'm going to do is based on the little bee we have here. Oops, I think it's like just broke a little bit. Oops. That's okay. I'll probably find another one in the yard. So in this one, we can do more of this watery texture again, like what we had on this one and this one. So you get equal designs. Same as before, we're going to go in with our lightest yellow. And I went ahead and already erased part of this. That's why it's not showing up very much right now. And add just a little bit of yellow to the wings too. Why not? So we're just doing that base color. I'm going to go back in and I'm looking at my bee and I'm seeing a lot of this yellow right along this bottom half here. Just in these two little spots. You can also add a little bit up here just to give it a little bit more color. If you want, you can go back in with some more of your orange color here. Just pop in a few little spots. It's looking good. Next, we're going to go in with our Payne's gray color. And on this one, this has a lot of black in it. So we're going to try and give some space here or there, just so there's a little bit more going on with it, so it doesn't look so heavy. I'm going to keep this kind of light in spots. Just going to let that bleed right into those other colors. Leaving little spots open if possible. And then as I work my way up here, we're just going to fill in the majority of this with that lighter blue-gray. So from there, I'm going to go a little bit darker with my black and blue. And this is where I'm going to create a little bit of a highlight right here so we can see that it's curving in. So I'm just going to add a little bit towards the outer edges. And a little bit along the outer edges down here too. You can see everything is still really damp. If you need to, you can assist it with a little bit more water on your brush. And then this is where I'm just going to go in with my lightest, I keep saying lightest, my smallest brush. And we're going to add some fuzzies. So you can see on our bee here, hopefully it's not wanting to zoom that much, but on our bee, there's a lot of tiny little fuzzies coming off of it. So I want to really amplify that on this since there's not much shape of the head or anything. So I'm just going to use really tiny brush strokes. If you want, you can always just kind of wiggle your hand a little bit to create more of that fuzzy texture. And this is very helpful. Same thing around these edges. Like that. May look a little odd since we can't see necessarily the full top of the head. But I think once we add our wings, that's going to help. I'm going to go really dark on these sides one more time, just in a few little spots. And then I'm going to clean off my brush really well. I'm going to switch to my number 4 round, and then we're just going to quickly pull this color over a little bit for the wings. Like that. It's kind of a weird angle of it, but it's okay. It's good for practice. So if there's any heavy lines or things that you don't want on your bee, you can always go back in with a little bit of water, and you can just scrub a tiny bit if you feel like there's textures that you might not want. And then I'm just going to add a few little veins here and there to show part of the bee. Yeah. Okay. If I wanted to, just to make sure it doesn't look super weird, I can just add like a little bit of a thing like that for the top of the head too. It's hard because it's kind of curled in right now, but it still taught me a lot about the shape of it, which is good. Okay. So once you have all these done, this is where you can decide if you want to do more with your designs. For example, if I go back over to these original ones right here, I'll show you how to put in some other little details and things to make it have more life to it. So these are perfect for studies. And then as you're working, you can take that further. That's still wet. What am I doing? So I'm going to create a little bit of lavender and other little foliage to go around these original ones right here while that's still drying. If you want, you can always start with a brand new piece of paper and add more details around it, create your own composition and make it look great. So for this one, I just want to show you some examples of ways to place these in a setting. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my alizarin color. And a little bit of my ultramarine blue, which is right beside it right here. And that's going to create a nice, really beautiful violet color. Now, if you want something that's a little bit brighter, what you can do is take some of your alizarin crimson, which I'm going to do right here. With a little bit of your phthalo or intense blue. Now this is going to give you a much brighter color. And that intense blue is going to want to take over some of your other colors since it's so saturated. So you might just need to add a little bit more alizarin to it. And here you can see how that's more of like a red violet. If I want to make it more blue, I can just go back in with a little bit of my intense blue or phthalo blue. And you can see how quickly that changes that back. So I need a little bit more of this color. There we go. So yeah, you can see this is a much more like blueberry violet color right here, or like a red violet. And then this is a slightly more muted violet. One other color that I'll mix that I'm just going to put right here is our cadmium yellow with a little bit of our phthalo blue, or I'm sorry, not phthalo blue, our ultramarine blue. I want a more muted color. And this will give you a green. Nice, like cool toned green. Now you can always use the greens that you have on your palette too. You can adjust them with a complementary color like your red or your alizarin crimson if it looks too synthetic. But these are the ones that I'm going to use today since I've used a lot of the colors in my other designs. So in this one here, if I were to do one that's like flat on the sheet of paper like this, normally for a composition, I would maybe want something surrounding it where this would be the focal point. So you can do like a wreath around it or something really cute like that. Now for something like this though, this is where you can play with texture and placing it in a setting. So let's say I want to take some of that green. I can do just like a little bit of foliage and things around it to help put it in a scene. Add some yellow to it if I wanted to. Or you can add a little bit of violet since violet is a complementary color to yellow. So usually with violets, I would do that as like maybe a shadow or something placed around it. You definitely don't want it to overpower the rest of your painting, so you can just use it sparingly. It's a nice neutral color. Now for this one, what you can do is you can add some, let's say some lavender or something around it. So I would do maybe some sprigs of lavender, which as just a quick refresher, you can put a little bit of paint on your brush. I'm just using a number 4 right here, but you can always go bigger or smaller. And I like to keep the brush away from me where I'm just stamping down these little shapes of the lavender here. That's if you want to have more control over it like that. You can always take some of your green to create a little stem. And that would basically be your lavender right there. Another way to do the lavender is a way that I like a little bit more personally, where you're just tapping on the lavender in different sections. Usually there's like a little space between them like that. And then again, you can go back in with your green and create a quick stem where it just soaks into the rest of that color. So one looks a little bit more patterned while the other one can look a little bit more naturalistic. So on this one, I'm just going to do like a little sprig or something right along here. Or actually, I'll do it on this one. I have a little bit more room over here. So I can just tap on a few little sprigs of lavender in spots. I don't mind if some is a little bit more transparent. I'm just using whatever's on my brush right now. Add in Some green for my stems. I like to do this while this is damp too, so it just bleeds right into that other color. And this would also be a cute thing if you had around it some, I don't know, like a frame or something around it with lavender, or it's going towards the lavender or away from it. You can do a lot with that. So this is just some inspiration for you for your own work. For this one, I think I'm going to do it a little bit different. I'm going to create some little tiny brush strokes, kind of like what you see here, but it's almost as if this bee is about to land on a flower. So just to change the colors up a little bit, I'm going to take a little bit more of my alizarin crimson, a little bit more of my ultramarine. Let's see what this color is. Ooh, that's a nice purple. Take a little bit more crimson. I want this to be more of like a pinky flower. Yeah, that's pretty. So just like a magenta color or something similar, I'm going to do for that. So it's still within that violet range where it's a complementary color, but it's a little bit different, just so we don't have lavender for everything. So on this one, I'm going to keep it nice and watery. I just want a little pop of color. So I'm just going to put a few little brush strokes down for a flower. If I want, I can always make some areas a little bit lighter. And I can go a little bit darker with other areas too, if I want to have a little bit more of a bluish red towards the center of a flower. Over here, some of this got a little bit muted, so I'm going to just use a little bit of my leftover green just to add some little sprigs of grass here or there. Just to place this more in a setting. And that's pretty much what I would do for it. Like, I'm not really having enough room here for a real composition on these, but you can always do these as swatches or examples for yourself, or you're just trying to come up with ideas. And that way you can hold on to these and use them as references later. But I hope you liked the class. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to jump on Zoom, and I would love to see how your paintings turn out. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.